June 11, 2025, a 70,000-ton Chinese aircraft carrier, accompanied by over 40 hypersonic missiles and nearly 30 fighter jets, surged toward Guam, home to some of America's most vital military installations. This was no military exercise. It was a stark and chilling glimpse into just how quickly the balance of power in the Pacific could shift and how America's forward defense network stood ready to decide the outcome. Just months earlier, U.S. carriers had pounded China's coastal military infrastructure, devastating its defenses. Now, Beijing was making a desperate gamble to reclaim its lost honor. They deployed their flagship carrier Shandong, escorted by billion-dollar destroyers, sailing nearly 1,800 miles from home. Their mission: to cripple Andersen Air Force Base and prove to the world they could strike directly at America's front line. What followed was a breathtaking clash of technology, strategy, and raw nerve. China would soon pay dearly for its gamble, but in those first moments, the outcome was anything but certain. At 6:15 a.m. on June 11th, radar screens at Andersen Air Force Base lit up with urgent alerts. A Chinese carrier strike group, the Shandong and 5 warships, was advancing toward the island. This was no ordinary maneuver. Only months earlier, the USS Gerald R. Ford and its air wing had ripped through China's southeastern coast. In just 72 hours, over 15 major PLA bases were reduced to ruins. More than 40 J-16 and J-11 fighters, each worth $70 million, lay in pieces on shattered runways. The financial loss topped $6 billion, but the psychological impact was far worse. Beijing's prized anti-access networks had collapsed under the weight of U.S. naval air power, exposed as powerless to stop it. Determined to erase the humiliation, Chinese leadership devised a risky counterstroke: send their only operational carrier, the Shandong, nearly 1,800 miles into contested waters and strike Andersen Air Force Base head-on. Their objective was clear: crater the runways, destroy aircraft, and send a message to both Washington and the Chinese public that the PLA Navy could bring war to America's doorstep. By 6:27 a.m., the Shandong's flight deck was alive. With steam, heat, and thunder, 28 J-15 fighters roared into the air, each armed with more than 4,000 pounds of missiles and precision-guided bombs, climbing to 25,000 feet in combat formation. At the same time, two Type 055 destroyers unleashed 24 YJ-18B cruise missiles, each capable of Mach 3 speeds while skimming only 50 feet above the ocean. 3 Type 052D destroyers followed, launching 16 YJ-12 high diver missiles designed specifically to smash through hardened shelters. In less than 8 minutes, more than 40 Chinese missiles were racing toward Guam, while squadrons of J-15s closed within 200 miles, preparing for coordinated strikes. Andersen braced for impact, housing more than 150 aircraft, from stealth F-35s to massive B-52 bombers, along with 12 million gallons of jet fuel. It was the backbone of America's forward reach in the Pacific. A direct hit could cripple U.S. air operations in the region for weeks. China's move was breathtaking in its boldness. It put $3 billion in frontline naval assets and hundreds of elite aviators into a high-risk gamble. Beijing believed that damaging Guam would show the world China could bloody U.S. forces, forcing Washington to think twice before ever striking Chinese territory again. But beneath the confident exterior lay a note of desperation. The propaganda machinery back home needed a visible victory to erase the memory of burning bases and lost pilots. Beijing was willing to stake its flagship carrier and the prestige of the entire PLA Navy on a single decisive battle. As the first inbound missiles closed to under 200 miles, the serene blue Pacific transformed into a lethal battleground. This was more than a test of American defenses. It was a direct challenge to decades of U.S. naval dominance, an attempt to rewrite the story of humiliation with a single crushing blow that could shift the balance of power overnight. Was this move by China's strategic genius or reckless folly? The answer would soon be written in fire. The US responds as the first wave of J-15s and over 40 incoming missiles closed to within 180 miles of Guam. America's defensive network activated with ruthless precision. Andersen Air Force Base was more than an airfield. It was the nerve center of a layered fortress extending across the Pacific. High overhead, E-D advanced Hawkeye aircraft scanned at hundreds of miles in every direction with ultra-long-range AESA radars, feeding live targeting data to command centers on Guam, and aboard nearby Arla Burr-class destroyers. Within seconds, computers identified every YJ-18 and YJ-12 by speed, trajectory, and flag profile. Along Guam's coastline, the batteries locked onto the highest altitude threats, calculating precise mid-course intercepts. Out at sea, the destroyers USS John Finn and USS Ralph Johnson, each armed with 96 vertical launch cells, powered up their Aegis baseline 10 combat systems. These advanced radars tracked dozens of supersonic targets at once, assigning interceptors to each. Then, the first defensive salvo erupted, as M6 interceptors blasted from their launch cells, accelerating beyond Mach 3, streaking toward the inbound missiles in a desperate bid to protect the island. The SM-6 interceptors were primed to engage threats more than 230 miles away. These weren't mere proximity detonation weapons. Their kinetic warheads struck head-on, using sheer velocity to obliterate incoming missiles in direct impact. But some of the Chinese YJ-18 anti-ship missiles slipped past the long-range intercepts, diving closer to their targets. That's when the ESS M-block to south streaked skyward at nearly Mach 4, their active radar homing systems locking on with unrelenting precision. They were built for this exact moment, hunting down the missiles that made it through the outer defenses. The real drama unfolded just miles from Andersen Air Force Base. Several Chinese missiles suddenly dropped to sea-skimming altitude, using the Earth's curvature to mask their approach. This triggered the U.S. Navy's innermost defensive ring. The IM-116 rolling airframe missiles, guided by passive RF and infrared seekers, launched in rapid succession, weaving a deadly web that detonated in brilliant flashes, shredding the low-flying attackers. Still, a few missiles managed to survive this gauntlet, streaking toward Guam at Mach 2. That was when the Phalanx CIWS came alive. 6-barrel Gatling guns spun into a blur, hurling over 4,500 depleted uranium rounds per minute. These streams of tungsten created walls of fire, slicing through missiles and sending their fragments arcing into the Pacific in spectacular tracer-lit bursts. Through it all, the base's automated sea-to network never missed a beat. Satellite, airborne, shipborne, and ground-based radar data merged into a single combat grid. E-D Hawkeyes, Aegis destroyers, THAAD batteries, and SPY-6 radars contributed their feeds, all fused within milliseconds. This seamless integration allowed each layer of defense to respond instantly. Satellites provided the strategic overview. Hawkeyes tracked and classified threats. Aegis ships eliminated the bulk of them. And close-in systems dealt with anything that dared approach. This was America's real strength, not just in individual weapons, but in the totality of its kill chain, a fully coordinated machine of war. As the smoke drifted over Guam, flaming debris splashed into the Pacific. China had gambled on a crippling first strike. Instead, they slammed headlong into the most advanced, multi-layered maritime defense system in human history and learned firsthand the result of decades of American investment in precision sensors and networked warfare. But the battle wasn't over. With Guam's defenses intact, it was time for the counterstrike. Inside Andersen's hardened command bunkers, screens glowed with incoming targeting data from satellites, E-D Hawkeyes, P-8 Poseidons, and stealthy MQ-5 drones loitering at the edge of the battle space. All of it poured into a real-time strike matrix, pinpointing the exact location of the Shandong carrier group, including its destroyer escorts and trailing support ships. At 7:12 a.m., the order came over secure comms: execute full spectrum, counterstrike, priority target, neutralize carrier. Deep beneath the waves, two Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines, silent and unseen at over 500 feet, opened their vertical launch hatches. Each loosed a ripple of UGM-109 Tomahawk Block V missiles, designed for maritime strike. Flying just 30 feet above the ocean, they used terrain contour matching and infrared scene correlation to slip under Chinese radar coverage. Within minutes, more than 20 of these stealthy missiles were bearing down on the Shandong, invisible to its aging surface search radars. To the west of Guam, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers joined the assault. Each vessel, armed with 96 vertical launch cells, unleashed a storm of Tomahawks carrying multi-target strike packages. In mid-flight, some missiles split off to engage different ships, creating a perfectly choreographed saturation attack. The Chinese escorts fired HHQ-9 interceptors in desperate defense, but the incoming wave was too much. High overhead, EA-18G Growlers pressed forward, their ALQ-218 receivers and ALQ-99 jamming pods blanketing Chinese fire control radars in electronic noise. Target locks failed, tracking screens went to static. Shipboard gunners were effectively blind. That was when the U.S. Navy's strike fighters entered the fray. F-A-1AT, F Super Hornets, launching from both Anderson and the carrier USS Ronald Reagan, climbed to 35,000 feet before diving to release AGM-158J ASSMers, stealth cruise missiles carrying over 1,000 pounds of penetrating high explosive. Meanwhile, F-35C swept in, their distributed aperture systems DAS and AN, a PG-81 AESA radars mapping the battlespace in real time. Their sensor fusion networks fed targeting data to every strike aircraft via Link 16 and MADL, eliminating redundancy and ensuring no munition was wasted. By 7:28 a.m., chaos consumed the Shandong. Multiple JASSM warheads ripped through its angled flight deck, plunging into hangar bays crowded with aircraft, munitions, and fuel. Massive secondary explosions tore the carrier apart, sending towering fireballs and jagged steel into the air. Sailors ran in every direction, some leaping overboard into the sea as the pride of China's navy burned. Escape from the inferno was impossible. Tomahawk missiles slammed into the sleek silhouettes of China's Type Z-55 destroyers, their blast fragmentation warheads tearing through radar arrays, shredding antennas, and triggering catastrophic missile magazine explosions. One Type 05 to destroyer, crippled and listing sharply to starboard, met its final fate when a massive detonation cracked its keel. The hull split like a wounded animal, and within seconds, the ship slipped beneath the churning waves. The American strike unfolded with the cold precision of a well-oiled machine. Overhead, satellites pinpointed ship positions in real time. Growler electronic warfare aircraft smothered enemy sensors. Stealth fighters marked priority targets with invisible beams of laser guidance. From multiple vectors, waves of layered missiles struck in perfect coordination, each platform functioning as part of a larger, living organism linked by secure, jam-resistant networks that could redirect aim points in the blink of an eye. By 7:40 a.m., less than half an hour after the first launch command, the waters east of Guam had transformed into a floating graveyard. Smoking debris and oil slicks spread across the waves, broken masts and lifeboats adrift among the wreckage. China's audacious carrier strike, intended as a show of dominance and a reclamation of honor, had instead sacrificed its most valuable assets. The Shandong, centerpiece of the PLA Navy and a proud symbol of China's maritime ambitions, was now a burning wreck. Flames devoured her decks, which lay twisted and torn, littered with destroyed aircraft and ruptured missile launchers. Black columns of smoke marked her position, a funeral pyre visible for miles across the Pacific. This was not merely a demonstration of superior firepower. It was a showcase of 21st century warfare where speed, precision, and networked lethality fused into a single, unstoppable force. By 8:10 a.m., the scale of China's disaster was undeniable. Below decks on the Shandong, fires raged out of control, enforcing an abandonment order. Over 800 sailors flailed in the water, clinging to life vests and half-inflated rafts, waiting for rescue ships that might never come. Nearby, two Type 055 destroyers were wrecked beyond saving. Their superstructures had been obliterated by Tomahawk strikes that ignited fuel reserves and ammunition stocks. One vessel rolled heavily, then slipped beneath the surface with a hiss of escaping air, leaving only a ring of debris. All around, lifeboats bobbed in the oily swells, surrounded by scorched radar dishes, splintered hull plating, and charred fragments of life jackets. The cost of this failed gamble was staggering billions of dollars in lost warships and aircraft, more than 1,500 sailors and pilots dead or missing, and, perhaps most damaging, the loss of national prestige. Beijing's carefully cultivated image of a rising, unstoppable navy had been gutted in under 90 minutes. Around the world, satellite images of burning carriers and sinking escorts erased any illusion of Chinese maritime supremacy. State media, which only hours earlier had been filled with triumphant rhetoric, abruptly shifted to terse, heavily controlled announcements acknowledging unexpected developments. In hidden war rooms deep within China, PLA commanders were forced to confront a bitter truth. Years of investment in a carrier-centric doctrine had been erased in a single morning. The message to the world was crystal clear. America's forward bases and carrier strike groups had not only survived the attack, they had transformed an enemy's boldest move into a strategic catastrophe. Allied nations across the Pacific breathed a sigh of relief. They had seen proof that the U.S. security umbrella was not mere diplomacy, but a living shield of steel and fire. For China, the loss cut deeper than steel. It was a wound to national pride, a scar across the narrative of inevitable maritime dominance. Challenging American power directly, especially with a flagship carrier, was not merely a military risk. It was a gamble with the credibility of the nation itself. And in this contest, China had lost everything it had hoped to display. As the battle's echoes faded and the Pacific swells began to calm, only the dark smoke rising on the horizon testified to what had happened. Beneath those waters lay the twisted remains of ships once meant to redefine naval balance. In under 2 hours, the Pacific had witnessed a stunning reversal of fortune, a daring offensive turn to ruin, a fleet broken, and thousands of lives scattered on the waves. The lesson was inescapable. America's integrated defenses, precision, strike networks, and unified doctrine could dismantle even the boldest maritime gambits with terrifying speed. For Beijing, this was more than a battlefield loss, it was a humiliation etched into global memory. For America's allies, it was reassurance that the shield still held. The wreckage, now resting in the deep, remains silent, but its message is loud enough for the entire world to hear. Underestimate American resolve, and the ocean will write your epitaph in fire and steel.